For coming out tonight. Very psyched to have our first in-house speaker, our first of two in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And so, so Kelly Miller here is second-year IEP student, and if you haven't heard me make this statement in a class, you probably have, but I like to say that you can either do really important work or really sexy work, but not the two, typically. And so, like when I write articles on surfonomics and stuff like that, you know, you get in the Washington Post, even though it really is not that important. But, you know, stuff like infrastructure and sewage and resilience and big stuff that actually matters to people, nobody ever gets prizes for that. No one gets, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio to do a documentary on them or anything like that, right? It's all the kind of, sadly, it's oftentimes the trivial stuff that gets the headlines and not the real work to make a better society. So Kelly chose to do the hard stuff and look at some real hard infrastructure issues and really jumped at this opportunity over summer. He wasn't a CBE fellow, but we helped him out because it was just such a good project and he was so amped on that. So I told him in exchange for some support, he had to come and present to us. So hence, we're getting the other side of the bargain is coming to fruition now. So let's give him a warm round of applause.
I applied to lots of sexy opportunities, but none of them accepted me. So I resorted to doing important work. So speaking of sexy, 3 times a month for the past 30 years, this man, Julio from Mexico City, puts on a 90-pound diving suit and jumps into the sewer system of Mexico City, swims around in the dark sewage, making repairs by hand and removing blockages that are clogging the pipes. And I just wanted to start by introducing you to him tonight as a symbol of how much goes on underneath the streets, how much it takes to maintain infrastructure that we don't need to know anything about. So welcome to Discussing the Disgusting, policy solutions to sewage pollution in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you're really into sewage policy, tonight's your night. We made it. I am a second-year student in the environmental policy program here, and I spent my summer working with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership in Oakland. So if you've been coming to the talks here, you're aware that the CBE brings in some really incredible, distinguished speakers, and I'm a little underqualified to be here tonight. But as Jason said, this was one of the obligations of my fellowship, so I'm very happy to be here because I really learned so much this summer, and I'm happy to have the chance to share that with you today. So, why should we care about sewage policy? Sewage transport and treatment is something that we would really not want to live without, but we really don't know much about. If you're living the lifestyle of an average American, then today maybe you flushed the toilet 5 times using 1.5 gallons per flush. Maybe you ran a load of laundry, which used 25 gallons of water. You took a shower, 10 gallons, cooking and cleaning in the kitchen, 20 more gallons. You did all this without ever having to pump a well or walk to a river with a bucket or really know anything about where the water was coming from and where it goes when you're done with it. And you paid about a penny per gallon. So today, let's explore the implications of having a sewer system process so much material. So on the agenda tonight, we will look at sewage issues briefly, internationally, nationally, and regionally. We'll talk about how a city sewer functions, how sewage pollution comes to occur, and then zoning in on the San Francisco Bay Area, talk about the state of affairs there, some policy solutions to sewage pollution there, and then a Q&A. And what I hope you can gain from tonight is an appreciation for the wonders of modern sewage, some knowledge about modern urban infrastructure, and some insight into how a policy process works in the city. So the group that I worked with, the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, is a national estuary program of the EPA. So there are 28 of these EPA estuary partnerships around the country, and they target what they call estuaries of national significance. There's 3 here in California, including San Francisco Bay. An estuary is a partially enclosed body of water that's connected both to freshwater and to the ocean. It tends to be a very productive type of ecosystem. Also tends to have a lot of humans living nearby. So this is why it comes to special attention from the EPA. So the San Francisco Estuary Partnership is a collaboration of government and non-government stakeholders working to protect, restore, conserve wildlife around the San Francisco Bay Area. They use this document called the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan to organize the set of conservation goals that we have. And in that document, action number 26 is to decrease raw sewage discharges into the estuary. And this is the particular goal that they brought me in to work on. I guess none of them wanted to work on sewage, so they found some outside help for that. Taking a step back, looking at international sanitation issues, almost 1 billion people, or 15% of the global population, does not have access to a toilet, practices what's called open defecation, meaning simply going outdoors. And long ago, when the world was a much simpler place, this was an okay way of doing things, but in the modern world, it brings a lot of human health risks and environmental risks. Gandhi was actually quite interested in this issue. He saw the population growing, saw that the old way of doing things was not going to be sustainable, and he said sanitation is more important than political independence. In other parts of the world, access to toilets and to plumbing and sewage systems is generally more widespread, but the sewer systems are not necessarily as robust as what we benefit from here in the United States. So if you've traveled in many places around the world, including much of Latin America, you may have seen a sign like this asking you not to throw toilet paper in the toilet. Toilet paper in such countries is a garbage product, not a sewer product, because the pipes are not broad enough to handle all that material. In the United States, we do have a really strong, effective sewer system. So what is that sewer up against? The average American is responsible for about 80 to 100 gallons of water per day, about 57 sheets of toilet paper. So you could multiply that by the population of a city served, and that is what a sewer system is up against. So the portion of the sewer that collects the sewage and transports it to a treatment plant, we call this the collection system. It begins with the indoor plumbing. All of the sinks and toilets in a home or another building drain into a pipe, and this pipe is called the lateral. The lateral runs from an indoor plumbing connection to the main sewer line. The main sewer line runs under streets and connects to a sewage treatment plant. So this particular pipe, the lateral, is actually the focus of everything that I did this summer. The lateral is a pipe which is privately owned, so it tends to be overlooked when a city is doing upgrades to the sewer system. This portion is missed because it's not owned by the city. And just because the indoor plumbing is functioning, that doesn't mean that there are not problems with lateral that can be both letting rainwater infiltrate the system or letting sewage escape from the system. So the collection system delivers sewage to a wastewater treatment plant. From there, the treatment begins. First with what's called primary sedimentation. This is simply treating the sewage with gravity, allowing it to naturally settle, liquids and solids separate, and then the water portion, which is most of what sewage is, moves on to the next stage in which oxygen is added, which activates a biological cleaning process, which is actually done by microorganisms. So tiny living things in the treatment tank are what cleans the sewage. And then from there, it receives a chlorination process, and then a dechlorination process, and then it's clean enough to be discharged into a body of water. So when it's working, it's a really wonderful system that we have, that all of the sewage comes in and then is cleaned to the point of being water and is deposited into a body of water. Here's a look at a sewage treatment plant. These places are tucked away just out of sight all around the country, doing some very important work for us. The grossest portion of a sewage treatment plant is pictured here. When the solids and liquids are separated, the solid portion comes into this form, which is called sludge. And most of this can actually still be used. It's either turned into fertilizer, or it can actually be used to power the treatment plant as a burned fuel. So everything that enters the plant has to go somewhere. When the system is working, it's really wonderful that we're able to clean all of our sewage, capture it, clean it, and then put it back into natural water systems. However, there's obviously a lot that can go wrong, and anytime sewage leaves the system without receiving full treatment, this is what we call sewage pollution. So, in the United States, there are two types of sewer systems. There's a combined sewer or a separate sewer. These are the two options that a city might have for their sewer. In the late 1800s, when cities began developing towards their modern form, they realized that they had to do something about all of the sanitary waste and also all of the stormwater that was clogging their city. So they built a set of pipes, and they weren't cleaning the sewage, so all the pipes had to do was simply move the sewage and move the rainwater into a body of water. So just find a way to organize it, transport it right into a river or lake. So when sewage treatment began developing, and we started initiating cleaning processes of the sewage, newer cities were able to build separate sets of pipes so that stormwater could be managed separately from sanitary waste, so that the treatment plant didn't have to clean all of this extra material. However, older, larger cities that already had a set of pipes are generally unable to adapt after the fact, and they're sort of stuck with these combined sewer systems. It's a much bigger challenge for them because the amount of material that they're cleaning is absolutely massive. If you consider a city like Philadelphia or New York, they're cleaning all of the sewage from all of the sanitary waste that comes in, along with all of the rainwater. And these, of course, are concrete jungles that have very little natural filtration. So the combined sewers are very problematic. They tend to do a lot of polluting. However, that type of sewer system mostly exists in the eastern half of the United States, mostly in older, larger cities. So other than the dots here on this map, every sewer system in the United States is a separate sewer, moving rainwater and sewage through separate systems. Here in California, the only combined sewer systems are in Sacramento and San Francisco. So in the Bay Area, there's 101 cities, and just one of those cities is served by a combined sewer. So one issue with a separate sewer is since you're not cleaning the stormwater, any pollution that occurs on the streets becomes pollution in the water. So this is Monterey here, these photos. The sign says, please don't litter. This water runs right to the ocean. But then I leaned in and photographed the drain, and it was full of cigarettes. The problem, however, that is most relevant to what I worked on this summer is something called inflow and infiltration, I and I. This refers to rainwater or groundwater infiltrating the sewer system and eventually overwhelming it, causing problems. So inflow refers to water that seeps in directly, either through an open pipe or seeping in through a crack in a manhole. And infiltration refers to groundwater underground seeping into pipes. And that might sound like it's sort of a minor issue, little bits of water, but the combined effect of it is actually completely enormous. And all sewage pollution generally traces back to this issue right here. So the main culprit here is trees. Tree roots are actually attracted towards sewage. They gravitate towards it because it's a source of heat and nutrients. And old pipes, especially ones made of clay, tend to develop little cracks. Tiny little tree root particles break into the cracks. From there they grow and expand. They're very happy to be living in sewage. And then the cracks break open, and eventually you've got a tree root running a hostile takeover of a pipe. But all the while, the plumbing can keep functioning for years, even though the pipe is now cracked open and just an open source for allowing stormwater to run through the sewage system. So to address this issue of inflow and infiltration, particularly in the privately owned lateral pipe portion of the sewer system, with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, we drafted this document called the Private Sewer Lateral Ordinance Report for the San Francisco Bay Area. So this addresses policies that can address this problem. But first, we'll talk about the forms that sewage pollution takes. There are two types of sewage pollution: SSOs, which is a sanitary sewer overflow, and treatment bypass. So an SSO occurs in the collection system. This is sewage spilling out, leaving the system, without ever having received any treatment. So this can be caused by a pipe defect, which is split open and the sewage is finding a way out, or it can be caused by capacity, where a certain portion of the system is receiving too much material, so they design special outflow pipes, and instead of running everything towards the treatment plant, some of it's diverted and just goes right into a waterway. And then the second type of issue is a treatment bypass, which we will get to a little bit later, but it refers to sewage leaving the system after only receiving partial treatment in a treatment plant. I realize this is a little dense, a little complicated, but I'm trying to be really thorough with some of the main points to try to give you a basic overview of what's going on here. So sanitary sewer overflows, SSOs in the United States. Estimates are very rough on how much of this happens, but it's tens of thousands of these events per year. It's estimated that it would take several $billions to fully address this issue. And sometimes these are sort of dramatic, like the photo here where the sewage is bursting out of a manhole. But more often than not, it's probably out of sight, just moving through an outflow pipe directly into a body of water. So this map shows the occurrence of these events in the Bay Area. We looked at a half year of data and found that there were 712 SSOs in that half year, spilling 15 million gallons of sewage, 14 million of which made its way directly to a body of water. And the Bay Area struggles disproportionately with this issue. The Bay Area has about 18% of the state's population, but was responsible for 38% of the state's sewage. So we also took a look at who the worst offenders here were. ED Mud is the sanitation agency that serves Oakland and some other nearby cities. So just between these top 5 worst spillers, there's about 10 million gallons of sewage exiting their systems without ever making it to a treatment plant. Second type of problem that we have is called a treatment bypass event. So what sewage is supposed to do, in the very simplified version here, is first go through the gravity sedimentation phase, which separates liquid from solid, and then moves on to further treatment. Because the first stage really isn't treatment at all, it's simply letting the material settle. But what happens is, after a rainstorm, due to so much stormwater infiltrating the system, too much volume is coming into the treatment plant, and they're not able to give it all treatment. Because each stage here takes a certain amount of time. So if they're receiving a really heavy volume coming in, they're forced to divert what's called the peak flow, meaning the high amount of volume coming in due to a rainstorm. They're forced to divert that around the actual treatment system and then recombine it at the last stage. This is called blending, where you combine untreated sewage with treated sewage and then discharge it all together. And the reason that the agency is flooded is because the stormwater infiltrating the system all throughout the collection system. So the wastewater agencies are technically not allowed to do this, but they are allowed to do it because they don't have the capacity to handle what comes their way. So until they're able to make upgrades, they have no other choice. So they're given a permit to do it. But here's the EPA official statement on this type of event. EPA strongly discourages reliance on peak wet weather flow diversions around secondary treatment units as a long-term wet weather management approach. The need to undertake peak wet weather flow diversions at treatment plants can be eliminated for most systems in a variety of ways. So unfortunately, usually the impetus for change here is when a treatment plant is violating standards for so long that eventually they get sued, and then that's the impetus for change usually. But some places are a little more proactive in funding these upgrades. So in the Bay Area, I believe there's about 48 treatment facilities overall, and about 13 of them are forced to practice this. So the 2 rows of numbers here outline how big of an issue stormwater entering the system is. The average dry weather design flow column, this is how much the treatment plant is designed to manage on a daily basis. And then the second row of numbers, the peak wet weather secondary treatment capacity, this is how much they're able to handle on a bad day. So it's usually 3 or 4 times more than what they can normally handle. But even with this excess capacity that they can do in hard times basically, they still get overwhelmed and are still forced to discharge sewage that hasn't received full treatment. So when sewage finds its way into a body of water, there's obviously human health risks and environmental threats. In terms of human health, contact with sewage causes a variety of illness because it has bacteria, parasites, and viruses. So it causes gastrointestinal issues, skin issues, respiratory issues. So certain bodies of water around the country are forced to post signs like this because they know that routinely, after a heavy rain, they're going to be dumping some partially treated sewage into the water. So people in certain places have to get used to this, have to limit what they do. Likewise, in certain parts of certain cities, there might be sort of a smelly portion of the city, and this is where sewage is leaving the underground system and finding its way into the environment. In terms of environmental impact, as sewage decomposes, as it breaks down it uses up oxygen in this process. So this is depleting the oxygen available for all the other life forms. Sewage also it's high in nutrients, which ends up leading to conditions which create algae blooms, which further deplete the oxygen in the water, further disrupting the food web. In the San Francisco Bay, there's of course a long history of seafood extraction, but dating back to the 1930s, they were beginning to see that pollution was spreading disease through seafood, so they could tell that the water was polluted. So as early as, I think, 1932, they had to halt seafood production for a while because things were so nasty in there. The best thing to happen for water quality was 1972, the EPA passed the Clean Water Act. This set some nice high standards for water pollution. So the standards that we have today are good. The problem is that they're often not met. So let's look at this as an environmental project and use the theory of change to trace a solution to the problem. The ecological target is the San Francisco Bay ecology, the wildlife, and the water quality in the bay. The direct threat that it faces is that sewage contaminated water routinely pollutes the bay. This is caused by stormwater overwhelming the sewer system, and this is caused by defects in the pipes, which allow inflow and infiltration of stormwater. So there's three things you can address this, because there are three aspects of the treatment system. You can increase capacity of treatment plants, so that no matter how much is coming in, they're able to treat it all. You can repair the public portion of the collection system. This is what we call a sewer main line, which runs over the streets. Or third, and this is the issue that we worked on, is you can promote ordinances that require inspection and repair of private sewer laterals. We focused on this because, for two reasons. One, it's most easy to influence as a third party because it's a little bit less costly and less complicated than repairing the other portions of the system. And secondly, this is the most overlooked portion of the system because citywide upgrades won't affect this because they're privately owned. So zoning in a little more on the problem here. Defining the problem as defective private sewer laterals contribute to sewer malfunction and pollution. Policy solution is to promote ordinances that require inspection and repair of defective PSLs. So you've got a city full of homes and other buildings. Every building has this pipe called a lateral pipe connecting its plumbing to the main sewer line. A high percentage of these pipes are malfunctioning, but they're privately owned. So what can you do about it? So that's what this law addresses. It's called Private Sewer Lateral Ordinance. This requires inspection and repair of defective laterals based on certain events. These events are called triggering mechanisms. So this is something that happens which triggers an inspection. You're forced to get it under these circumstances. The main triggering mechanism, the main driver of these ordinances, is a real estate transaction. So if you sell your home, part of the inspection process includes getting this lateral pipe inspected. This is similar to a termite inspection, which is generally required in all real estate transactions. A termite inspection is something hidden behind the walls. You might have a wall full of termites, not know anything about it. So this inspection is a protection to the buyer, and it fixes sort of a dormant problem that you might not be aware of. This actually happened to my brother with the lateral pipe. He bought a house last year, and no one had been living in it. He moved in, started using the plumbing, and it turned out that tree root had been clogging the pipe while the house had been unoccupied. So as soon as he started using the plumbing, immediately it backed up, got blocked, and spit right back into his basement. And it's a pretty horrible thing to have happen when you first buy a house. So I asked him if he had any photos of this. He didn't, but this is a photo of my niece. So this is what's at stake here. 5-year-olds with basements full of raw sewage. Her own family's sewage. So some other ways that these ordinances make themselves work, some additional triggering mechanisms, is you can use major remodeling as a trigger. So you set a price threshold. Anyone who wants a permit to do, say, $75,000 worth of work on their house is required to get one of these inspections. You can do age-based, meaning the city looks at their records as soon as the lateral is over 25 years old. This triggers an inspection. That's a much more, it's very effective, but it's much more complicated. There's just one city using that right now. Or you can use indication of a defect based on a sewer main inspection. So when folks are repairing or inspecting the main part of the sewer system. You can detect if there's a problem coming in from one of the pipes based on the flow rate. You can see if maybe it's being interrupted by blockage. But the bread and butter of these ordinances is the real estate transaction. So if an ordinance has some of these triggers but doesn't use a real estate transaction, we consider that to be a weak ordinance. In the Bay Area, of the 101 cities and towns, 34 thus far have adopted this type of ordinance, mostly in the past 5 years. This has become a popular thing for a city to do to address this issue. And you can see there's clusters of where this has happened, and that's mostly due to regional lawsuits that have happened, where either the EPA or an environmental group or a combination of the two address a whole region and say, these 5 or 6 cities that are being served by this treatment plant, you're doing too much polluting, it's over. So as part of comprehensive sewage upgrades, passing this ordinance tends to be part of those comprehensive upgrades. So if you are the homeowner who is forced to repair your sewer lateral, this can cost a couple $1,000s. So hopefully, ideally, the cities are doing something to assist with that. They can offer free inspections, they can offer rebates for repair costs, no interest loans, or have programs designed to help low-income or senior citizen homeowners. So if you're distributing these funds, it's an extra expense for the city. So ways to raise funds for this include adding an extra tax or a fee on the sewer bill. You can also have a mandatory insurance pool. So all owners are forced to insure their lateral pipe, and then if they have a problem, funds come back to them to pay for the repairs. Or something that the Estuary Partnership is working on right now is exploring grant funding to be given to cities from government grants that exist for environmental programs to help fund the city's PSL program. So we recommended that all 101 cities in the Bay Area adopt some type of ordinance, but we also focused on cities that we thought either most urgently or most practically should adopt an ordinance. And we had these 5 criteria. First is if you're spilling over 5,000 gallons of raw sewage by SSO, you made our list. If your treatment plant is practicing blending, meaning that all the material that comes into a plant is not treated, this means you've got a capacity problem, so we included all of them on the list. If you have a financial aid program without an ordinance, so this means some cities have recognized this as a problem and have started distributing funds to homeowners to help make the repairs, but they haven't yet passed an ordinance. So we think they're halfway there, and we included them on our prioritization. Fourth is if you have an ordinance but have weak triggers, then we are encouraging you to adopt the real estate trigger, because this is what is really going to drive your ordinance. And then fifth, this refers to the incredibly complex boundaries that occur between cities and wastewater agencies that lead sometimes part of a city is covered, part isn't. I won't go into that too much, but the first thing I did when I started my work was I built this enormous, ridiculous database that organized all of the wastewater agencies and all the cities in the Bay Area, and it was quite complicated. So what can be done with the research that we've done? The San Francisco Estuary Partnership is connected to something called ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments. This is sort of like a Congress of all the Bay Area governments that sends representatives to meet and work on issues that affect the whole Bay Area. So through advocacy of working with representatives from that group, we can help to get ordinances passed. Secondly, the California State Water Boards worked with me on writing this report, and they enforce water laws and sewage pollution laws. So these are the folks who sort of have some of the power to tell a wastewater agency when they're not up to standards, and they issue the permits that allow them to do whatever amount of polluting they're doing. So they've got a lot of sway and influencing. So this report helps them to justify, helps organize the information, helps representatives from different cities see how they compare to other cities. If a government is passing an ordinance, this report serves as a manual because it outlines the entire process of passing an ordinance. It includes a sample ordinance, what makes one effective, what makes one weak. And then finally, support for advocacy for anyone either within or without government, either someone working for a government, an environmental group, a lawyer, a private citizen. Anyone who's interested, I hope, will now be using this report because we took a vast array of very complicated data that was spread throughout different institutions, put it all together in one place. So anyone with any interest in Bay Area sewage policy can now find all the information in one place, and I sure hope they do. So, before I conclude tonight, and I imagine I was speaking very fast and ran through it for a quick time, but before I conclude, I'd like to say thank you to James, who was my friend and supervisor at the Estuary Partnership, and it was a real pleasure to work for him. And also to Jason, who, with James, helped arrange this position for me. They're really making the shaved head work, sort of mirror image thing. So thank you to you guys. And now I'd love to know what questions you have about sewage.
I've always wondered, so obviously we know there's all this sewage getting out into the environment. How long does it last before the kind of natural, the estuary itself or wave action? Like, so what, does the sewage end up getting treated by natural processes eventually? And is it so that it's just, so we're looking at kind of peak events where it's really dirty, but then it gets cleaned up? How does that work?
It would depend on the severity, but essentially, yes, it gets treated by natural processes. And it's also important to keep in mind that when you hear about sewage pollution, the substance that is the pollutant is mostly water, but it's contaminated water. So yes, we'll get cleaned eventually. I can't be too much more scientific with that, but James, any insight there?
Yeah, so it would definitely depend on the depth of the system that you're working in and in the kind of the action of that system. So if you have high inflow, like high tide exchanges, you're going to get far more exchange of that material in and out. Of course, we have that 3-mile no discharge limit for raw sewage for vessels operating in our waters, which mean if you're out in the ocean, in those more turbid waters, in those deeper waters, it gets cleaned up quicker. The kind of the old adage, dilution is the solution to pollution, right? Way back when is kind of what they're operating out in the open ocean. But when we're talking about a system like the San Francisco Bay, where we have at least 2 oyster restoration projects that are hugely successful, millions of new recruited oysters, these are very valuable resources that could be affected by these discharges. So it really depends on the system you're working in. If it's a lake, far more impacts, not a lot of exchange of water. If you're talking about a bay and estuary, you're going to get that stuff flushed out more quickly.
Thank you.
Yes.
Not to bring up a controversial topic, but I'm sort of always curious about the wet wipes situation, you know? So how many of these problems are due to blockages, due to people just putting stuff that shouldn't go in the toilets?
Yeah, so wet wipes, the people who work at a sewage treatment plant, they would tell you they're not flushable. People are working on suing those companies to remove the word flushable from them because, so toilet paper breaks down incredibly rapidly and incredibly efficiently. The wet wipes do not, they do not at all. They've tested that, you know, they've put it in a blender, spin it around like crazy, and it's still a wet wipe. Whereas toilet paper, boom, it's just right into the water. So you're encouraged by sewage professionals not to use wet wipes.
Is that like a really big problem in the system? Or should we push more to like make these illegal or ban them? Like, you know, they seem heinous to me in their effects.
Lots of folks agree with you. I haven't really formed too strong of an opinion, but I'll just speak for the fact that the people who are working on this hate them. So that's the general word. Yeah. Yes, sir?
Yeah, what would be the best use of sewage? Now, I'm looking at the fact that as we mature more, we start thinking about taking things that you don't want and making the greatest possible use out of it. And the second question has to do with, as we have sea level rises, I think we're going to have to pump the sewage up to get to the ocean.
Okay. Second part of your question, I'm not too equipped to speak on, but the first part, what's the best use of sewage? It's to drink it, absolutely. And I think this is the future. The first place that's going to be doing this is San Diego. They're working on converting sewage directly to drinking water, and it'll just be a closed loop system. A beautiful thing. The sewage is currently getting cleaned, 99% of the way to being drinking water. If it's clean enough to dump in a body of water with our high water pollution standards, it's very close to being drinking water. It's really more of a psychological barrier, in my opinion, that holds us back from that. So eventually I think we'll be just closing the loop, sewage to drinking water. But also, before that, sewage is used for a lot of irrigation because it is cleaned to an extent where it can be used for irrigation, and then the solid portion is used as fertilizer. So there's a lot of efficiency already, but I would say drinking the sewage is the future.
I'm asking also, if you're, sometimes they burn the sewage for heat. And the question is it better to put it on soil, the solids I'm talking about, or is it better to convert it to heat into run motors?
I'm not sure which is better.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is a question.
Kelly, if I may really quickly,
You're
so
always may.
it's kind of the same thing with recycling versus compost, right? If you can recycle something to a higher and better use, you want to do that rather than compost it, right? So it's the same thing with sewage. If you can use it for beneficial use rather than burn it, which releases carbon dioxide and has some other effects, that's better. In San Francisco, we're actually piloting a project right now that's tied into resiliency to sea level rise, to create what they're calling a horizontal levee, where you run sewage plant discharge behind a wetland that's created, that's essentially a ramp rather than a wall that's a levee, so that when you get higher and bigger storm surges coming in, you have this wetland that can kind of be a buffer for your built infrastructure behind it. And by reusing that sewage water, that processed sewage water that has nutrients still inside of it, to be that source of water in a state where we regularly have droughts, both chronic and acute, we're looking at building resiliency through the reuse of this material. So doing exciting things, and we're just piloting that now. So we'll see what science comes out in a couple of years from that.
Yes.
With the understanding of potential health risks in mind related to open defecation, is there not a way for the trees to be benefiting directly from that nutrient source of our biological waste while still channeling the majority of it to a sewage treatment plant?
That's a good question. If you have familiar with septic tanks, so this is where your home just has its own miniature sewer system with no connections to the outside. Septic tanks tend to have beautiful lush green grass above them because it just filters the material out of itself, and then, yeah, it fertilizes. I think what you're saying is sort of a good idea, but as far as I know, it's not being considered, but I like where your head's at. Yeah. Yes.
So I know whenever we get a big rainstorm here, there's a lot of runoff from our sewer systems, and we get all the beach closures and everything like that here. Could you see your project being done here as well, in this area of these local cities?
Yeah, certainly. This is sort of a wave of progress that's happening in different places around the country, mostly in more urban areas, but I'm not sure why that is, and I think it would definitely benefit a place like this. It's just an efficiency in the law books. So there's not any place that I think wouldn't benefit from one of these laws.
I've researched about dry toilets. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
A little bit.
Yes. So basically, it's a toilet that's not connected to anything. It uses bags and it's sanitary. Because every time you flush it, just use a little bit of electricity, it twists your, and it's odorless, and there's a company that's working, it's actually packs of poop in plastic bags, which is not very good to separate for the people in the waste management plant. It wouldn't be good for them. So these guys are working on biodegradable bags. That to me sounds like a very, very good idea, so that we don't contaminate the water. Do you think that's a good path to follow, like a good policy? Like instead of contaminating the water and wasting so much water, just dry toilets.
I'm with you. Yeah, I think
that's the future. I wish that more people learned about this, because I believe that's the future.
And would that fit as well into an urban setting as it would in a suburban setting where people have.
Yeah, man.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Are private sewer laterals, are they for commercial, like businesses and stuff? Or is it
Yeah.
only homes, only residential, or is it businesses also?
Yeah, because the lateral just refers to that section of piping.
Okay.
So any building that has plumbing has a privately owned sewer lateral.
Alright, and then, if I understood correctly, you said that infiltration from like big rain events is actually the largest source of pollution, because it gets into the pipes and overloads it, and then it ends up coming out on the streets and stuff?
Right.
Interesting, alright.
So,
That's all right.
so this chart, it just shows that. The point is, on a treatment plant, after a rainstorm, they're receiving about 4 times more volume coming into them. And they're only designed to be taking sanitary waste. They're not
Yeah.
designed to be taking any rainwater at all.
I see.
So that's an indicator of just how many problems throughout the collection system
Yeah.
there are.
Well, now, yeah, I mean, up until not too long ago, they were designing cities to essentially have all the water run off of it as fast as they could and go out to the ocean or, away. But, I don't know, I'm personally working on a little project doing, it's called Ocean Friendly Gardens. And, sinking water back into the, aquifers and water table and stuff like that. And I'm just wondering, the infiltration part kind of was interesting to me because it's
Yeah.
kind of counter.
The Estuary Partnership does work with that as well, promoting green infrastructure around the Bay Area. Because the more water that's hitting trees and vegetation and is moving in a thoughtful way, then the less of these problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was also wondering, this may be beyond the scope of your talk here, but the fact that we use the same quality water throughout like a home system, for drinking is what's in the toilet or in a shower or what you're garden, like, and obviously it would be really hard to have different quality waters, but it just seems like using the highest quality water for all of these essentially gray water needs is highly inefficient. Are there any systems-wide thinking on that, obviously we had the Water City concept here that was developed, and I'm not sure how that's doing, but anything more at a higher level that you know of?
Well, yeah, the one place where you can most safely use water that's not up to standards is for a toilet flush. So my understanding of those Water City systems, which is a system that has a closed loop within itself reusing water, is that water goes right to the toilet flush and not to anywhere else in the house. So for your drinking water, your showering, you're pulling from the public water supply. And for your toilet flushing, you've got a closed loop where you're producing that water on site. So I think that'll be the concept of that movement, and we'll see how far that goes.
Gotcha, thank you.
Does the Bay Area, do you know, have any plans for implementing the toilet to tap, or however, a better way to call it, that type of reuse and recycling water system in the Bay Area? And then if they do they have any strategies, or have you heard of any ways to get people on board by not making it seem so gross that it is toilet to tap, even though that is what it is, but it's still.
Can you describe more what toilet tap means?
Well, just taking wastewater and treating it to the point where it can be drank. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's a pretty new concept, but I think people will catch up to it.
Yeah.
As far as anything being done, James, do you know of any already?
Yeah, so in California, we have some really intense regulatory challenges with this. And that's kind of where the hangups are now is, you see the purple pipes, which are the reused pipes. Getting permits for that is a really challenging topic right now. So I think the steps to get to where you're alluding to is to overcome those regulatory challenges at the water board level. And then once we're allowing cities to do that, because in some places we don't even allow it, is to then work with the communities, engage them, do that outreach and education, and then kind of normalize that practice of that tank to tap idea. But yeah, there's definitely some regulatory hurdles to cross before we get anywhere near that.
Do they do that in Orange County?
No. And that's, I'm glad you asked that, because I was trying to add up the numbers that you had there, counting like 5, 25, and 5 flushes per day, right? The average use in San Francisco is about 50 gallons a day per person. The average use in Orange County per person per day is about 500. And that was, I think, numbers they pulled during the drought. So, interesting ideas. No, not a lot's happening on that in Orange County as far as I'm aware. But just kind of give you an idea of what's going on there.
Yes.
Kelly, do you have any examples worldwide of cities that are kind of leading the edge, like on the leading edge of a treatment system that could be applied here in the United States?
The only one I know of, I did look into that. I don't remember any of them except for San Diego,
Okay.
which is moving towards the toilet to tap concept.
Okay.
So we're rooting for San Diego to start drinking their sewage ASAP so the rest of us can step in.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
What are some of the ways to discourage tree roots from getting into sewer pipes? You know, could you kind of rank a series of the best or worst?
Yeah, there are certain trees that grow deeper than others. So if you're planting a tree on your property, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that certain trees grow more shallowly and are more appropriate for a front yard, and others are just going to go to the lowest possible point. So that's one factor. And then other than that, just be aware if you've got one and get it inspected. If you've got a massive tree on your yard, it's probably causing a variety of problems, really.
What was the term for the overflows again?
SSO.
SSO, okay. These huge storms came through Milwaukee 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and within like 3 days it happened twice, right? And like there was actually sewage like erupting out of people's basements. And afterwards we were told that there's an incentive that the city gives to have people disconnect their gutter system and their yards from flowing into the city streets, right? Is there some sort of incentive that exists here today?
The incentive is that it's illegal to do that. So it happens a lot because people have a home and, you know, they're tired of their gutter soaking a portion of the yard. So what they'll do, they'll just go to the cap, which connects to their sewer. They'll uncap it, put the gutter right into it. So this is their way of managing water on their property, and they're either unaware or don't care that they're contributing to these sewer spills. So when I differentiated inflow and infiltration, that type of connection is grouped in inflow. It's a direct stream of water going right into the system. It's generally illegal.
And I think in Milwaukee, that's how the whole system is set up. It's an older city. So the idea was that they were going to cut off, you know, like a certain amount of money off of your water bill if you disconnected your system and like fed the water to your garden or something like that.
Yeah, so being an older city, they've probably got a combined sewer. So the system is managing all the stormwater anyway, so that's why it probably wouldn't be illegal there. But if they're becoming overwhelmed, then they're trying to divert some of that flow away. I really appreciate all the questions you guys asked. Thank you. That was cool.
All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll let Kelly hang out here if anyone would like to kind of talk with him about his experience and introduce yourself. And thanks a lot. I learned more about sewage than I had in my whole life, and actually I feel the better for it. So thank you.